Good morning and welcome to the Sandwich School Committee meeting of April 30th, 2016. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Today we are here to interview 5 candidates for the position of interim superintendent for the Sandwich Public School District. We have an hour scheduled for each of the candidates, and we will be bringing the first one in very shortly. Does anyone have anything they'd like to state before we get started? We have the candidates being held in a room down the hall, and they will come in and be introduced to us, and then we will introduce ourselves. So once Beth introduces each candidate, then we'll ask for each of us to introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started, let them know about the questions, and get started. Everyone has 5 packets of the questions. So we're going to go around the table, and we will start with Beth. So she can take, or no, Jim, do you want to start? Okay, so Jim will start with the first question, John will take Sean take number 2, and then we'll just keep going around. And we'll keep the same questions each time. At the end, the candidate will be asked if they have any questions for us, and then give their closing remarks. And I will escort them out, get a phone number or contact for May 4th when we vote. And Beth will break. We'll have a few minute break, and then Beth will bring the next candidate.
Sounds good.
Come on in.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is Dr. Nash. I'm here to you and we guys voting yes.
How are you?
Nice on yourself.
I'm great.
Welcome, Dr. Nash. I'd like the school committee to just introduce themselves first, and then we can get started.
Good morning, my name is Jim Dever. I've been on the committee, starting my 3rd year next week.
My name is Sean Roche. I've been on the committee as well 2 years, and starting mine next week as well.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, I'm Beth Cummings.
Hi, Beth.
I'm Nancy Crossman, chairman.
Good morning.
I'm Stephanie Hall.
Good morning.
My name is James Graham.
Good morning, Sharon.
We are.
I know that feeling.
And we also have one other member, Carrie Ames, who was unable to attend.
Yes, I think Beth had let me know.
She will be watching remotely
Perfect.
at a later time. So we have, we're going to ask you to give some opening remarks, and then we have 17 questions for you. Your opening remarks can be 4 to 5 minutes long, but we ask that you take about 2 to 3 minutes for the individual questions. Then when we're done with the last question, we'll ask if you have any questions for us, and then you can give your closing remarks. And then you and I will go out in the hall and we'll get a contact phone number for next Wednesday. Okay, so please begin.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to interview. Goes without saying. Appreciate you coming on a Saturday morning to commit to interviewing a number of candidates, and also welcome those people who are in the audience and those who are watching at home. I'd like to, very briefly, because I know that you've read my resume, and probably that's what has gotten me to this point, just highlight a couple of things, if I might, and then draw some comparisons that I saw when I was preparing for this interview and doing a lot of reading about Sandwich Public Schools. First and foremost, as my resume indicates, I have a great deal of experience, I'd like to say, 40 plus years, almost 46 years, before I retired. And then Prior to that, I would say to you that part of that experience, and a good chunk of that experience, was as a classroom teacher, and I think that's critical. Almost half of my career, before I, as I call it, grew up and decided that I might want to try something else, I spent as a classroom teacher both at the high school level and at junior high. I taught English, loved it, but then decided that I needed to have a challenge in my life more than teaching, although many times when I was in my role as superintendent, I certainly looked forward to going into the classroom when I would have a bad day. After that half of my career, and I made the decision to get another degree and follow an administrative path, I've spent almost a good chunk, the other half of my career, as an administrator, both at the building level and also in the central office. I think it's important when you sit in the position of a superintendent of schools, either interim or permanent, that you have the ability to say that you walked in the shoes of a building administrator when they come to you with those issues and problems that they tend to speak to you about. And I've done that on the secondary level. After I spent a number of years as a building administrator, I then moved into central office and did the traditional pathway to becoming a superintendent. I spent a number of years as director of curriculum and professional development, moved into an assistant superintendent position in a rather affluent district for 1 year, and then finished my career as superintendent of schools in Hanover for 7 years. Thought that I was going to retire, but then got a telephone call from a neighboring district, and they asked if I would consider coming in as the interim superintendent of schools. So I have been an interim superintendent of schools, and later on, hopefully in some of the questions that you'll ask, I'll have an opportunity to address how I see that role being a little bit different than someone who is the permanent superintendent. And I spent a full year in Freetown-Lakeville Regional School District and absolutely loved it. Took this year off, so this was really the first full year that I had off as a retiree. And quite frankly, at times I was bored, so here I am. But I'd like to just quickly tell you that when I read information about Sandwich Public Schools, I saw that in my career there were a lot of experiences that were similar to either things that are happening, going on, initiatives, programs, things that you have instituted in this school district. And I'd like to mention those because either I have been involved in them in my capacity, in my different roles or positions, or I have initiated them. So let me just ramble them off, if I might. Project-based learning, STEM. When I was superintendent in Hanover, I initiated STEM labs for my 3rd and 4th graders because I felt the need for students to be involved in project-based learning, problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, all of that. So we did that early on. The concept of, at the elementary level, standards-based report card, we initiated that in the district when I was curriculum director and led that charge. Responsive classroom, I did that in my Hanover district. RTI, we set up that model with an evaluation and assessment piece in Hanover Public Schools, so I felt very comfortable and kind of excited reading about those kinds of things that I saw. The capstone project at the high school, we initiated that at Hanover High School. It is terrific. Senior internships, partnerships with the community. We did that many years ago when I was an administrator in Middleborough. So that felt good for me. I guess my point being that besides possessing the skills, I think oftentimes we talk about, is the fit good? Is it good for you? Is it good for me? I felt good about that, so I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Again, my name is Jim Dever. So my first question is, if you were a tree, what? No, I'm kidding.
You can finish that.
No, I'm kind of giving you a chance to continue what you're talking about. Could you tell us what drew you to Sandwich, why you applied for this job?
I can continue to say that I did reading. First of all, I'm not unfamiliar with this area. Many, many years ago, when I was a teacher in East Bridgewater, we used to travel here, it seemed, oftentimes in the spring, because it seemed like Sandwich was the proverbial baseball team that we faced. And I was good friends with the coach, who was an English teacher, Pat Cronin, who taught next door to me, so I would trek on down when I lived in East Bridgewater, and I had been here. Also, I remember when the school was being built, recognizing all that went into this as a new building. So I was always curious about that, because it was a time years ago when a lot of places weren't committing and weren't putting up new buildings. But looking at the programs and the kinds of things, the STEM Academy, I think was very intriguing. I'm a strong believer in experiential-based, project-based learning. My dissertation for my doctorate was on service learning, so I understand the value of expanding the classroom outside of just the walls that we typically teach in. And those kinds of things kind of intrigued me the more I read. The budget issues are intriguing. Years and years ago, I interviewed here, and I think it was the superintendent when I was just starting out, because I actually, when I went back and was looking through some documents, I found, I think, my cover letter. And I remember thinking about the fact that Sandwich had such an interesting dynamics with the state and the way it funds the budget. And I had not ever seen before that difference in what the state feels the town can pay and what they are going to pay. And I could understand the issue that created, but I remember that. So there are lots of things. Interdisciplinary courses at the high school. We started that in Hanover, created a humanities approach. I know that you do it here in the 9th grade as a course that you offer. I just felt it was just a lot of things that were going on in programs and initiatives were things that I believed in, things that I valued. I kept seeing words like rigor, relevance, the 4 C's, partnership for 21st century learning. Those are the things that I've been involved in. So that was exciting for me to see a district, even though I would be an intern for a year, to see a district that had similar, at least I felt comfortable, similar beliefs about where they were going educationally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you again for coming. Sean Rush. What would you identify as the biggest challenge facing the Sandwich Public Schools, and how would you address that challenge?
Well, I think, like everything else, your budget is your chief instructional tool. Without it, without giving teachers and staff and administrators the resources, and the job of the superintendent, a job of the superintendent and the school committee, is to advocate in the best interest of students what is needed for teaching and learning. So certainly, I can't go into the level of detail because my readings really are probably more superficial than being here on a day-to-day basis. But I certainly think without an adequate budget in any district, including Sandwich, you have challenges. That being said, any district faces the challenge of closing the achievement gap. I think the concept of equity for all students, the concept of trying to ensure that all students reach the level of expectation, not only that the state has imposed upon us, but that we ourselves say is important, I think is also a challenge. I also believe that a challenge for a district, and it may apply to Sandwich, is the need to ensure that you have strong relationships with your other stakeholders, those who sit on the town side, when you ask them to support your budget, and unfortunately, they may not be as aware of things as you would like them to be. So I think relationships are probably as true here, making fostering good, positive relationships, as they would be anywhere. But it would be difficult for me to probably be any more specific than that, based on the fact that I really haven't been here on a day-to-day basis yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello again.
Hi there.
My question is, have you been responsible for creating, explaining, and defending a school budget to a school committee, finance committee, and board of selectmen?
Well, have I ever. So, where would you like me to begin? certainly as superintendent of schools in Hanover, I had 7 years of doing that and working with the school committee and leading that charge. We were very successful in the fact that we built, we were one of the first new high schools under MSBA to be built in the state of Massachusetts. Back in 2000, we opened in 2011. The project started in 2008, 2009. There had been 2 unsuccessful votes for that project prior to that. And when I came on board, it was not at all my doing, believe me, I'm not taking credit for that. The community was ready. The school had been built in 1950. So with respect to budgets, yes. But I'd like to just maybe give you a little bit of what happened when I walked in as the interim superintendent of schools in Freetown, Lakeville, because I walked in May of the year that I was going to begin to shadow the interim superintendent for a month. The situation in the district, and this will speak to this question about budget, was that the year prior to that, the superintendent had left in August, and therefore it was very difficult for them to appoint and do a search, and they took the assistant superintendent and put her in that position. She had created what she thought or believed was a zero-based budget, and doing that had really taken some liberties with staffing. I'll leave it at that. And as such, I walked into a district that did not have adequate staffing for special needs students. We had also a budget that had been agreed to and had new positions, but those new positions had not been negotiated, nor had job descriptions been written. So I was sitting on a budget that had about $300,000 to $500,000 waiting for new positions that had not been negotiated with the union, nor had job descriptions been written, and I also had about $300,000 to $500,000 in outstanding personnel who needed to be reinstated as one-on-ones, otherwise we would have been in violation of IEPs. So I was scurrying to understand the budget. There were also some other inconsistencies, regional school budgets. If you can do a regional school budget, you can do any budget, believe me. Regional schools are very different than other school districts that are non-regional. And we had to really do a quick study, audit, if you will, very quick of the budget. So my experience with budgets as a superintendent, it's as I said, it's your chief tool for instruction. It's the way you move a district forward. It's the way you provide the tools, the resources for your staff. You spend way too much time on budget. It usually starts around October, and you're not done until that town meeting votes it, and you can breathe. So I wish we could spend more time in educational programming, but without it, we can't do programs.
Would you like to go ahead? Go ahead.
Okay. What is your approach to developing a budget? Follow up on that.
Okay. Developing a budget is it's really an iterative process. It doesn't, as I said, timelines. Well, let me step back by saying I think there are 3 elements that you've got to always keep in mind when you're building a budget. Budgets need to be built on trust, transparency, and relationships. If you don't have good relationships with all of your town officials, if you do not include parents, if you do not include your administrators, if you do not include teachers, if everyone does not have a role in some capacity in that budget, then we have done ourselves probably a disservice in thinking that our budget may get passed or may be understood before it's passed. The process generally begins early in the fall. I typically would ask my school committee members to give me priorities that they would like to see addressed in our budget. I can give you an example. A lot of times priorities for us were class size at the elementary level, ensuring that those were where we wanted them to be. I would work through the budget process with sheets, forms that I would develop, For the administrators, there would be individual meetings with all of the stakeholders, all of the administrators, all of the principals, the athletic director, facilities manager, the business department, the SPED people, all of those individuals. We would come back together as a team in our meetings, and we would bring a budget forward generally to either a subcommittee of the school committee or the whole school committee, whichever way that was. And they would have working meetings where they would go through iterations of the budget, where they would see what the initial cost and the impact would be, and they would then make some recommendations. Now, during those meetings, this is where you would have all of the constituents, the principals from the different schools, the athletic director, and so forth, present the budget, their piece of the budget, so that questions could be asked. Because if the school committee doesn't get it, if you will, if they don't believe it, if they don't understand it, they articulate that. They are our spokespersons. If they have questions and that we can't answer, then how can we go forward and expect that others would not have the same questions? So it's an ongoing process. Generally, we also go out and meet. I always have, early in the year, with my town manager, town administrator, what I call a state of the town meeting. Just he and I, or she and I, sitting there with my business manager, having that discussion about what are you projecting in the town, what's going on, what do we need to be aware of, what are the things that are going to be happening on the town side that maybe may have some impact on the school budget, so I could bring that back. And I always had that early in the fall, so we could get a sense of. And I would share with them the things that were going on. And one particular, one kind of side story is one of my town administrators in Hanover, 15, okay, I'm going to stop there and we'll tell that side story then. Thank you.
Maybe it'll fit in this question.
Okay.
As a follow-up on Stephanie Hall, how would you create support for our school budget within the town of Sandwiches? You talked about state formula.
Early on, once we established priorities, and excluding the whole budget process from the school side, it's going out and meeting with town officials early. One of the things that happened in Freetown Lakeville is that when I walked in, they had passed an override, $1.5 million override. And unfortunately, it's a two-member town, it's a region. It came on the backs of the voters of one town, and the other town really financially couldn't support it. I didn't want to support it, I believe. But through all of the work to prepare for that override, they really excluded their other town from any discussions. Well, you don't operate that way. Both towns make up that district. Kids come from both towns to our schools, and they excluded them. And I got that sense when I first came on board, when I met with the selectman first, and then the town administrator from Freetown. I got the sense that they felt left out. It was simply a matter of feeling not included. We're the town that gets left out. So I set up meetings, just initial meetings, early in the fall as part of my entry plan, which I would do if I were an interim superintendent here. I met with individually or collectively the members of the Board of Selectmen, in addition to the individual meeting with the town administrator or the director of finance or whomever attended those meetings, to begin to have discussions about the concerns they have, the issues they have, or the challenges they see. Your question, I think, talked about how do you get support. You certainly have to be transparent. You've got to include and ensure, and there are all kinds of mechanisms for doing that today, a lot easier than years ago. But I think it's important to, for the administrative team, in particular the superintendent and the business manager or director of finance, to make sure that they have put together some very extensive, detailed documents. The school committee needs to know the budget. Because you have to support it. And if you get questioned in the street by someone, you don't want to look foolish. You don't want to have to pick up the phone and have an angry conversation or a not too nice conversation with the superintendent saying, I didn't know you were putting in this new position. That's not the way to operate. That's where transparency comes in. So I think building, that goes to building trust. And to end that conversation, when I met with the selectmen, the 3 selectmen from Freetown, and I was probably had been in the position less than a month, their comment back, one of them was, and I brought my director of finance, that's the most information that was shared with us in the last 4 years. Really. You're welcome.
How do you perceive or define the role of superintendent and that of school committee in terms of governance of the district?
Well, you know your roles defined by the law, if you will. That doesn't mean that school committee members don't overstep their roles. Doesn't mean that superintendents don't overstep their roles. I've had the good fortune of sitting, or not so good fortune, of sitting where you sit. I was a school committee member for 13 years, a regional school committee member. I served on the elementary section of Old Rochester's regional school committee as well as the secondary. So I have an understanding probably of how perceptions of school committees are developed to some degree. I think the role of a school committee and superintendent needs to be one that is driven by working for the same interest, which is students. We are here for students. You are here for students, and I'm assuming that all of my members of school committees are here to do what's in the best interest for students. We may not always agree, we respectfully disagree, but our goal is to advance that which is educationally sound and which will be in the best interest of students. And to that end, I think, well, school committee members and certainly superintendents don't always agree. I think it's important that you're open and honest and that you have a working dialogue with all of your members so that you're able to know what in particular their concerns may be. When I was in Hanover, I had one of my members who was a former teacher in middle school who was my facilities person. That was his concern. He was always concerned if we had issues that teachers had brought up. I had another gentleman who was my business person. And you appreciate and respect what they bring to the table because they have a skill set that is extremely valuable. So I think it's about relationships and about ensuring that you're open and honest. Thank you. You're welcome.
So, would you say, when it comes to your approach as a leader, are you more of the surround yourself with good people, give them the tools they need to succeed and kind of step back? Or do you see yourself as a more hands-on, detail-oriented approach? Or somewhere in between?
I'm both. There are times which a superintendent needs to be hands-on. My leadership style is really what I call distributive leadership, directed autonomy, however you want to define it. And let me explain what I mean by that. Part of a role of the superintendent is kind of like a lead teacher, the head teacher, if you will. And my role, or the role, is to ensure that the mission, the vision, the values, the beliefs, the goals are understood by all. But it's not my job to implement them, if you will. My job is to secure the resources, to ensure that everyone is on the same page with respect to the vision and the goals. But then it's distributive in that it's up to those who are on the administrative team and the teachers to implement that. If I give them the resources, if I give them their tools, and I empower them to do the job, and I hold them accountable, then it's not my job to do that. On the other hand, there are times when you have to be hands-on. You take facility tours. When I was in Freetown Lakeville, one of the things that I do before the opening of school early on is to tour all the buildings to ensure that they're ready physically. We weren't ready. And unfortunately, it wasn't because they didn't want to do the job, the facilities people. It was because they were never empowered with the money that was there in the budget to do it. They always felt like they were going to get no. They were told no, no, no. So it was a shock when the director of finance and I toured all of the buildings, and we said, well, that can't happen. We can't have a courtyard where one teacher can't bring the students out because they haven't trimmed the shrubs and the bushes for the last 10 years. So that's hands-on in some ways. So you have to be hands-on. If no one else does it, you're going to get involved in doing it. And obviously, administrators come to you many times with questions and concerns and challenges that engage you in a hands-on way. And part of that can be the way that you mentor those people, because they haven't gone through the issue before. So you walk them through it, and then they're more comfortable with it. A lot of times those are legal issues. You're welcome.
How do you view the role of parents and community in our schools?
Well, critical. Without them, we wouldn't be here. Their children are the reason we're here. That's why I taught. That's why I spent all that time in the classroom. They are critical to the success. I see them as partners. I see them as collaborators. We need to engage them in different ways, both formally and informally, in committees, and also involved in other kinds of things. We need to partner with them. We partnered with a lot of our PTA groups to do fundraising and to feel that they were supported by the school district. I'm currently doing that in a district with as part of a scholarship team for the district that I taught in, and I think the current superintendent there sees the importance of having partnerships and seeing people as being collaborative and being as partners in the same goal. So you have to engage them. You have to make sure that they're aware of what's going on, particularly around budget time. And there shouldn't be surprises. One of the things that parents understandably get angry about is when they get surprised, whether it's a surprise because of a change in classroom or restructuring or calendars, school calendars, which create a lot of challenges and a lot of comments. So the more, I know. Believe me, that was one of the babies creating that school calendar. That'd be one where I would gleefully give it off to the school. And say, here you go, whatever you'd like. But so I think the more that you can engage them by making them, providing them with the information that they should have ahead of time. The worst thing is they wondered why I always used to hate to do 2 or 3 hour delayed openings. Because every parent is just about working today, and the worst thing in the world is have a delayed opening, because then they're scurrying around to find some kind of coverage for 2 hours, and it's difficult for them. So engaging them and making them feel welcome. When a parent calls a superintendent's office, you better return that call. That's my job. And I am not a superintendent who believes that you shouldn't do that. I am also a superintendent who has met every single person that I hired, who will sit with every person no matter what their role is, no matter who they are, because I want to be able to look a parent in the eye when they say, did you ever meet that bus monitor? Did you ever meet that bus driver? I can say, yes, I've met them. I may not remember their names, but I have met them and I've had a conversation with them. I think that's important. I think that goes a long way in ensuring for parents that they feel good about sending their students to our schools.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Continuing on with our schools,
how would you continue to support the recent reconfiguration of our school district?
And this will be the second year, I believe, coming up. This is
Yes.
your first year as
Yes.
reconfiguration.
Yes.
I'm sure that your budget for FY17 has some funding in it that has supported the plans for year 2 of reconfiguration. And that would be something that is part of my entry plan and meeting with the outgoing superintendent. I would want to have that conversation. What is it that's already in the works? I'd want to speak with the director of curriculum and professional development and those meetings and find out what have you started here as part of the support in professional development for that restructuring. So those kinds of things have to happen. Certainly, visiting classrooms, getting out and just having the conversations when you walk down the halls, stopping and saying, how are things going? Part of an entry plan that I have done as a permanent superintendent and as an interim superintendent includes early on lots of meetings. An entry plan is really about not hitting the ground running, but hitting the ground learning. And so you meet with all kinds of stakeholders. I'm not going to go through the list, but part of those people that you ask to bring in, and you may not get them in the summer, but you'll get them certainly in the first few weeks of school, are teachers, to go and meet with them and see, talk with them, find out what's going on, what do you need, what's happening. So you want to make sure that you understand where you are in this reconfiguration, what is in place already. You want to support that, ensure that that's happening. You don't want someone to interrupt that and then staff feel, well, gee, what's happening now? We've got this. The last thing that this staff wants with an interim superintendent is to say, all that we've started is just going to, whoa, are they going to understand what we're doing? I think you want to make sure that you can reassure them that you do, and that you will support what they need, and that you will move forward to see, not just as a caretaker for the year, but what's the next step. And that will come really from direction from both committee members as well as administrative team, parents, and others when we talk about what does phase 3 look like. I know you've got 2 phases. Phase 1 step, which I thought was okay. I like that name. I thought that was a good way of kind of putting that, phasing it in. Yes. And you've gone through a lot of changes, and I think change is difficult. I always tell people, I didn't say this, Michael Fullen did, change is a journey, not an event. And so we're all on this together. We need to figure out, and we need to be supportive. And let me tell you this, I'm sure you know it, because you've heard it. But what I've read, you've gone through a lot of change. And you need to breathe. Everybody has to kind of breathe through it, but you've gone through a lot of change. You've done a lot of change in a short period of time that most districts don't do in years. And that is difficult for all people.
You're welcome. Could you give us your experience with standard-based report cards and curriculum mapping as it relates to initiatives in our district?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Me too.
Only because I alluded to that early on. I studied under Tom Gusky and took many courses with him. He's one of the, we were having lots of conversations in Middleborough years ago. We had all moved to standards, the first set. I'm not talking about Common Core now, but we had all moved to standards, and we were still grading it in an antiquated, archaic fashion. So as Director of Curriculum and Professional Development, the superintendent said, your job is to lead the charge to develop a standards-based report card, which we did. We did a continuum model in reading, which I thought was a developmental model, which was a little bit more difficult for us to implement. But we knew that students can be, through grade 3 at least, the continuum looks very different for a child in reading, and that's okay. And with tiered intervention, we hope that we can get them to where they need to be by the end of 3. So I'm very familiar with it. We implemented it. I'm sure it's been revised a number of times. I think The piece that was the most interesting to do was, once we got beyond and worked with staff and teacher teams to do this, was to educate our parents. Because they would say, no matter what you use, they'd say, okay, is that a B? Does that mean A? Is that an 80? What's that mean? So if it's a 2 or a 3, well, what do you mean by that? So we found we did talking points. All of our teachers had said, when they got together after the first term, they said, we're getting the same questions. We did a feedback session with our teachers. What are the challenges? What are the questions that parents are asking you? And that's when they said, at the very end, they said, okay, are they a B? Are they an A? So, the other question was curriculum mapping. I started curriculum mapping in Middleborough prior to, district-wide, prior to them having an electronic version, like Atlas Rubicon. I actually have studied and taken a number of classes with Heidi Hayes-Jacobs. I did weekend retreats with her when I was curriculum director in New Hampshire and other places. And she was one of the leading people about mapping curriculum. So we then, in Hanover, were able to go to an electronic approach in curriculum mapping, which I believe you have here. And first it was with TechPass, and then we moved over to, I think, Atlas Rubicon before I left. So I have done that, led that charge as a curriculum director, as assistant superintendent in Dover-Sherborne. We were just implementing curriculum mapping. It's the consistent way to ensure the what of what needs to happen. How you do it is really the classroom teacher's expertise, because they are the experts. They are the ones who, but we're the ones who have to say, this is the what and what needs to happen, so we have consistency and clarity. We also had non-negotiables, because one of the things that teachers felt, I know, is the overwhelmingness of curriculum. And so we took our curriculum and narrowed it down to, this is the non-negotiable. This is what you've got to teach. So this is a must. And they felt more comfortable.
We'll keep going on that same topic anyway. How would you support and expand our current initiatives like project-based learning with the STEM Academy and Project Lead the Way offerings at the high school within our current financial policy?
Not knowing what your budget has in it for professional development, certainly I think you have to have conversations and know what the plans are. I am not here to say that people have not thoughtfully developed, an approach to what needs to happen in the next year to support, both in training and in resources. So I think that's my first thing, is again, part of the entry plan is to have those conversations. What needs to happen? What have you already done? What resources are in place? And then, quite frankly, if something comes up and someone says, oh my gosh, we need more units in our engineering lab, those are very expensive, in our robotics and that, then I need to figure out a way to find that money in the budget. And again, within reason. I'm not going to find hundreds of thousands of dollars probably in the budget, but I need to be able to support what's happening, because you value it, the teachers value it. They have already committed time and effort, and in the need to respect what has already happened and what is continuing to happen. I think that's part of what the role has to be of the interim who comes in. Was I more brief on that? Well, I'm watching you, you're time.
First time in a time.
Recently, the Sturgis Charter Public School was listed as the top public school in Massachusetts. With its proximity to Sandwich, a number of our students enter the Sturgis lottery. Similarly, Sandwich is close to Upper Cape Regional Technical School and what it has to offer students. What initiatives would you support or suggest to make Sandwich High School as a top choice for students as well.
I started to read the program. A couple of things happened. You've got this bottom-up approach now with STEM Academy. By what is happening in programs and courses in grades 7 and 8, it will filter up, it will change what's going to happen with course offerings in that high school. I also think that you've done quite a bit at the high school level, the developmental guidance program, your approach to, like I said, the capstone and internships and business partnerships, as well as the humanities approach. Those are things that typically, believe it or not, still do not happen in the majority of high schools. I oftentimes think that we're the best kept secrets, that public schools don't do enough to publicize what they do. And let me give you an example. You said, how do you keep kids from going somewhere else? In Hanover, part of the philosophy of the building committee, when I came on board, was, if we build it, they will come. We had a 1950s high school. If you leaned on the wall, believe me, in the windows, they had had it. And the members of the committee really felt that if they built this new school, the kids would come. We lost our students because of the proximity of Hanover to Route 3 and that, to lots of private schools, Archie Bills, Xaverian, BC High. What we found out was something quite simple in some ways, that we weren't going after those kids who left because we were doing it too late. That many times those students who were anticipating or had thoughts of going to private school had to commit before the holidays. And typically in high schools, we're doing our program of studies and our parents' nights in January and February. We brought our parents in and we had that conversation with our 8th grade parents because we looked at our numbers and saw that we were still losing 40 to 60 students a year out of the high school. And we made a simple change to try to address that. And we needed to go after and advocate and present as if it were a sales meeting and sell it. And we don't do sometimes a good job of that. With respect to your voc tech schools, you are always going to, public schools, public high schools cannot compete with vocational technical high schools, both in the resources they have, the programs they have. And there are students who should and do attend those schools because that's the pathway that they've chosen. But I do like the approach of, I believe, of Sandwich High School in talking about pathways. We're not just having you take a bunch of credits that you accumulate, kind of units, that we think in terms of pathways, and those pathways begin really with the STEM Academy in grade 7. So I think part of that goes, I don't know if I answered the question, goes hand in hand, Nancy, with trying to ensure that people are more knowledgeable about what's going on, but you will always lose those students. And as much as the private schools come in and try to advertise and do the things that they can do, we have to do a little bit better job, I believe. Thank you.
Here in Sandwich, we're just kind of, the committee folks, just starting to establish a strategic plan. I'm curious if you have any experience with the strategic plan. You can tell us.
Well, on your side of the table, mostly, we did not do a strategic plan in Hanover because we were in the throes of building a new high school, and that seemed to absorb most people's time. However, having said that, we did better than that. When we built the new high school, we did our strategic plan through educational visioning. We did not build a model high school. We were not one of those that took Whitman Hanson's model and used it. With all due respect to Whitman Hanson, I'm a Whitman Hanson high school graduate. So my theory was, you build a house, your own house, and you thoughtfully think about what your needs are. As superintendent and as the person who's the lead teacher, we, meaning all of the stakeholders, the teachers, the administrators, the school committee members, the town members, need to think about what that building looks like. So we did one better than the strategic plan. We did educational visioning. We actually hired in someone who was an architect and a planner, educational planner. And he spent visioning sessions with us. We did surveys, and we had 33 members of a team that met over 3 days a week for a series of meetings, and came up with what did we envision education should look like. And what we came out with was really not just the vision for the high school, it was the vision for the community. The concept of flexibility in learning, integrated approach, sense of community. And if you were to go to Hanover High School, you would see that. And so, but I have done strategic planning as a member of the Old Rochester Regional School Committee. Those sometimes become weighty documents, and they're not livable, breathable, unless you really take that strategic plan and then create, at least in my experience, an implementation plan, a timeline, resources, and all of that. So you create this document, and part of the document says you want to, let's say, Old Rochester's plan. You want to be in the top 10 performing, top 10% of the districts in the state. Well, you have to create changes sometimes within your structures to make that happen. And you can't just take the plan and put it away. So I have done strategic planning. Dr. Ralph Jaspero was one of the individuals who was doing a lot of that many years ago with school committee members, that long session. I found what was good about it and what was bad about it.
Another thing that we have recently completed was a comprehensive review of our facilities capital needs. And with that in mind, what experiences do you have with the establishment and implementation of a capital improvement plan?
I've done multiple plans. In Hanover, we did capital planning yearly. So in other words, it was an automatic piece of our, separate piece of our budget that we submitted early in the fall. We were a district that owned our own sped services in our vans. And so part of our capital planning every year would be to renew one van. We had, 10 vans, and one was at $150,000, that would be, and they automatically knew that. We also did a lot of work with the CPA, Community Preservation Association, because one of our schools in facilities planning constituted or fell into that category, and so we were able to get a lot of funding working with the town for that. So we've done capital planning, that approach, where I would submit it as a separate entity of the budget, and the town then would argue for the needs. As the fire chief would argue for his trucks and police for theirs, we would kind of go back and forth. But along those lines, I also would meet, before we went to that long list, which we put on every year, I said to the school committee, we really need to prioritize this, because we really have no way of letting them know what's essential, what becomes, a safety issue. So we started to do that. But I also would meet with the chief of police, whom I had a great relationship with, and the fire department. We had 2 great people, and we would sit down and have some discussions about needs. So we would go in, what are you looking for? And because we knew there was a limited amount of money that the town could commit. So we kind of had some conversations. The last thing we want to do is to go in and overwhelm the town with all of these things. In Freetown Lakeville, they had not done capital planning at all. And when I had done the tour of the buildings, we saw that there were a lot of things that we couldn't fix. We didn't have the money and the resources to do that, certainly, and it took more than a year. We had to go for bid. There were lots of things. So we created a 3 to 5 year capital plan. And we prioritized, and they had started that before I came, but it had never come to fruition. We prioritized that according to safety. We put categories. These were our safety needs first. So number 1, and we would check them off and address them. And as the end of the year approached, if there were any funds available, and this was something that had been shared with our stakeholders, meaning our townspeople, our local officials, so there were no surprises. Remember I said there's no surprises in the budget. When all of a sudden they see us out there doing something in facilities, and they say, where did they get that money? They knew. We've already had that conversation. They had seen that plan, and they knew that that would be something that we would address. And in fact, I would say, we're going to be repairing X, Y, and Z. We're going to be painting this building so that you know about that. But, so I've done long range and then used to doing the year to year.
My question is, what role does professional development for teachers play in the success of a school district?
When you make wholesale changes, reorganize, bring in new approaches to, for example, curriculum mapping. We instituted understanding by design in Middleborough many years ago, Wiggins and McTighe, and the way you design lessons. You can't just plop it and think, okay, we'll anoint you, and then we'll walk away. You need to have an implementation plan with every initiative. When I say initiative, I get a little crazy about that word because everybody talks about initiatives. When you change something, do something differently, bring in a new math program, introduce response to intervention, you have to provide professional development, you have to provide the resources, and you have to do this in an ongoing basis. It's not a one and done type of thing. Most of us never learn that way. Most of us do not learn that way. We go back. And so there has to be, that's the implementation. How long is it going to take? It's kind of like the S curve, where you, at the beginning you really don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. But then you get to a point where you know what you don't know, and therefore that's when you start asking, well, we need more of this, we need some of that, till you get to conscious competence. I feel great. You've got to constantly go in and be a bellwether. And I would expect my administrators would come back to me at meetings. I mean, I hold administrative meetings generally, every other week. So, and meet with all the individual people who are, like the Director of Curriculum and Professional Development, we would be meeting with even separately because usually their meetings run very long. They love to talk curriculum. So, and we would talk about those things and really have an understanding of what are the needs. And if teachers are telling you, guess what? And we've got to support them. We've got to find a way to do that. And we need to listen to that because ultimately we are then wasting dollars, wasting time, and we'll see it on the side, and it will be one of those, and this too shall pass. So we don't want that.
So my question's a little bit different. Tell us about a situation in your life where a decision did not go according to plan. How did you learn from that process?
There are many decisions that don't go according to plan when you're superintendent. Someone said Bobby Burns, the best laid scheme plans of mice and men often go astray. For all the thinking that you do, for all the planning that you do, for all of the homework that you do, and I like to think that I'm a pretty prepared person, there's always a time when things go a different way. I give you lots of examples. I'll just talk about the new building. I think I felt as a superintendent coming in, the building project at Canterbury High School had 2 failed votes by the town. So I thought that as a new superintendent coming in, I was going to have to devote my entire first year to educating stakeholders, meetings, all kinds of things, every meeting you could think of, to sell this project. And I was prepared to do that, of course, but I was wrong. I did not have to do that. And I had done a lot of work in preparation for that, and then turned out that I didn't have to do that at all. That the community itself was ready, and that I had a team of parents and citizens who, behind the scenes, were working to do that, and who are the best. And all I needed to do was to meet with them and support them. So, there are lots of things that you think will turn around. You hire employees that you think will be great employees, and ultimately your principal says, it's not working out well. So we make decisions every single day as superintendents. And I think some of those decisions you have time to really think about, and therefore you recognize afterwards that it wasn't a great decision, and other times you don't. I think one of the, well, let me just stop there.
And for our last question, we're going to end on a positive note. What is an accomplishment that you are most proud of and which you consider your leadership to have been transformative?
My biggest belief as a professional educator is the need for equity and excellence for all. And when we talk about equity, there are lots of barriers to equity in public schools, and sometimes we're not even aware of those. And I think when I look back at my time in Hanover as superintendent, I had the leverage to be able to look at programs that were creating barriers, particularly our special needs programs, where it wasn't always about access, and it wasn't always about excellence. I have a strong belief that the students who need the help most need to have the best and the brightest in front of them, and that wasn't always happening for our staff because we had not done it that way before. So I think breaking down those barriers, and then also, with that respect, opening up opportunities for all. Public education, to me, is about opportunities for all students. It's not limiting those opportunities. It's allowing students to make choices. It's not about prerequisites. It's not about leveling. It's about the fact that we, as a public institution, should allow a student to make those decisions when they leave school. But if we don't give them those tools, because we have said, sorry, you can't go into that class, sorry, you're this student, then we close those down way too early in life. And how many times have you and I seen students met people that we graduated with where we knew them in our schools, in our class, when we were students with them, as maybe not the best and the brightest, and then you see them later, and you say, oh. I try to espouse those beliefs and values, because that's what I believe in. It drives me a little crazy when we say that kids can't do things, and when it's more about adults than it is about students. So I'm most proud of that. I am really proud of the high school we built, and I will tell you why. I simply said, it is not a traditional high school. We believed after our planning that we wanted an integrated approach. We wanted teachers to be together in an approach where they weren't isolated in classrooms, but they were together as a cluster of integrated disciplines, learning from each other, and sharing a cluster of rooms. And so to that end, we created different structure. We hope to use structure to change the way people communicate with one another and collaborate. And I left shortly after that, so the effectiveness of that is something that we would still need to evaluate. But I thought, to me, that was certainly something that I was very proud of, being involved in the educational planning of that. You're welcome.
Thank you. That concludes our individual questions. Now we have just a few minutes for, if you have any questions for us, and if you could give us your closing remarks.
Well, let me, first of all, thank you again for inviting me here this morning. I know it's certainly not an easy job for you, but I thank you again. I close with a couple of comments about what you would get if you selected me as your interim superintendent of schools. First of all, I think most importantly, you get someone who's done the job before. I don't have to learn the job. I've been a superintendent, and I've been an interim superintendent, and the two are different to some degree. You'd also get an interim who would not be applying for the permanent position. And I say that because I think it's important to point out that I would not be worrying as I walked into this job about the fact that I needed to then go through a process again, And then if I were not successful, I would have to then search for a job somewhere else. And I think that creates somewhat of a distraction for people. So I'm a retired educator, and I will go back into retirement after this year. So I guess my point being that I would be tunneled in and I would not be distracted as much, humanly possible, by the fact that I would not have to worry about that. So I think that's an important point to ponder. It may not be the most important point. But I also think that when you bring in someone who has experience as a superintendent and also as an interim, they can take on some roles that someone who has not done the job cannot do, simply because, not because they don't have the skill set, but they haven't done the job. And so they sometimes without having that experience, are not able to really understand the questions to ask or the issues and the challenges that may arise. I think an interim has to be a very good transition leader. I think one of the roles, one of the jobs that you play, you're transitioning out, if you will, at the end of the year when the new person comes in. So you have to know what it is that you need to do to ensure that it's a seamless transition. And as you transition in, there are certainly things that need to be completed. There are things that you need to think about, the opening of school, the finishing of hiring, staffing, those kinds of things. So I think that's a role that an interim plays. Someone with experience has done that in their capacity as a superintendent. Certainly, we all opening the school year comes every year for many years, and one of the things that you plan. You also can complete, probably effectively, any unfinished task. There's no question in my mind that there will be unfinished tasks, just like there were unfinished things that the current superintendent is not going to neatly be able to clean up and say, here you go. Boom. On June 30th or whenever, everything's tied up. That doesn't generally happen, as what happened in Freetown Lakeville. We walked in and we still had hiring. 80% of my administrative team was brand new. I was hiring a brand new business manager, assistant superintendent, elementary principal, and 2 assistant principals. So someone, again, who's been a superintendent has done that, has been involved in that. There's no learning curve to that. And you don't have a lot of time to waste when it's July and you're looking to fill positions, so you need to know what to do. I think also, as an interim, one of the roles that you can play is, throughout the year, is to be kind of an objective set of eyes for someone who is able to act either as an advisor or consultant. It can look differently because you're in there for a year. So you can look at things. You can offer some advice or ideas or recommendations, and I think that's important. You will not, as I say, be able to deal with all the rocks, I call them. But you'll know what needs to be prioritized when you leave as part of your exit plan that you can then hand off to someone coming in. That is so critical. And what's the next big challenge when you asked about earlier about reorganization, the next level of that. And I think that's critical. And so I think those are some of the roles that an interim can play. But I'm not going to be a caretaker if you would hire me as an interim. I want to move the district forward. That's what made me feel so comfortable about what I read, because so many of the things that you are currently doing, I have been involved in some capacity. And so when we talk about everything, I think in the end, it's about what's a good fit for you. Whether I'm a good fit for you at this point, at this juncture, or whether I believe that you're a good fit for me in some ways. So I would simply end on that, saying that, in May you get an interim, a superintendent who has the experience and who's done the job before.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
We are scheduled for 10 minutes in between, but we need to be back at 10:15.
Okay.